welcome back, guys. And this is episode 6 of Previously Prohibited. I'm Mel, here with my co-host Jenin. Thank you so much for watching. And we wanted to, real quick, just if you are here, if you want to support us, the best thing you can do is to hit that like button, hit subscribe, follow us on YouTube, Rumble, on X now. We're up on Substack as well. So we would really appreciate the support. And let's get into it. What do we got?
So, for our stupidest or worst, I don't even know what the name is exactly, tweet of the day, I thought this was a good one to bring us back to Gaza, which we really can't forget about because it's just horrific daily. Is that so? This is
certainly not funny.
Yeah, it's not funny. It's not at all. Do you know this guy? I've seen his stuff. He has a lot of followers, like close to 100,000, I think.
No, he's not that high. He's got like 47,000.
He's not okay. That makes me feel better, a little better.
I just looked at him the other day, and I was like, I still can't believe this jerk has 47,000.
Yeah,
because all he does is just post really hateful stuff like this.
Yeah. And for people who are just listening, he says, "Whenever I'm cold or tired, I think about the people of Gaza, about how much less they have than me. Then I smile because fuck these people." And that is, I think, a particularly important thing to talk about today because there's a new. All week, there have been reports of babies freezing to death. This was a headline I saw today. I still read the New York Times, even though it's horrible, but, just for sort of general ideas of what's going on. 5 babies die from the cold in Gaza as temperatures drop. And the new Zionist talking points have been, well, there are a couple. There's first the fuck these people, who cares? And then the other is strategy has been, well, actually, like, it's not cold enough for babies to die, so this must be Pallywood. Here's an example of that. This is some account. Sorry, my screenshot's bad and I accidentally cut off the name, but there's no truth to the claim that babies are freezing to death. Absolutely none. They're a bunch of liars. And then a temperature chart showing temperatures, in the 40 to 60 range. So, Mel, why don't you explain why?
So we have to break down, hypothermia for everyone is when the core body temperature falls below 96 degrees. Babies are especially susceptible to hypothermia because their little bodies have to work so hard to keep them warm. So when you have infants living in tents with no belongings, we have to remember these people have all been driven from their homes. They're living in tents and they are, struggling to keep everyone warm. Well, then the temperature drops below 50 degrees. But then what actually happened was there was a lot of rain. The rains flooded out the tents. And, what can you do? The babies, they get too cold. They can't maintain core body temperature. And unfortunately, they pass. And this is a totally 100% preventable death. There's no excuse for it. The bombing has just, again, not stopped. In fact, this is very similar to what happened last year during Christmas. Americans are sidetracked through the holidays and whatnot. So Israel really, really ramps up the bombing. And we saw it last year. We're seeing it again this year. Especially they have gone after all of these hospitals, right? My guess is that their thinking is that the only buildings essentially left are the hospitals. And even them, I mean, they're so, most of them obviously are running on generator power and whatnot. They're barely functioning as it is. And so my guess is that they're assuming that hostages are having to be taken into these hospitals. That's the only thing I can think of. If I were to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're not just simply sadistic, right? Which I don't typically.
Yeah, I don't either.
But again, so what are they doing? They're forcing the evacuations of these hospitals. And that's where we saw just 2 days ago, this doctor out of the northern Gaza. This man is just a hero. He's I'm sorry, I'm going to pull him up real quick if you guys
I have it if you want. Yeah.
Here we go.
I think this is quickly becoming an iconic photo.
Right. So this is Dr. Hussam Safia. And
Yeah.
he is from the Kamal Adwan Hospital, and that is in northern Gaza. So this man is just incredible. His son was killed at the hospital at a hospital in October. He was targeted. There was a drone strike on the entrance of the hospital, and it killed something like, I think, 25 people. And his son actually happened to be one of them. So this man is a surgeon. He has been working every single day since the bombing campaign began last October, and he was ordered to leave this hospital 2 days ago, or actually, he was told that if he didn't get out, that they were going to bomb. I forget actually what went down, but this is actually a picture of him surrendering to the IDF as he walks out, and it's so emblematic. It's a video of just kind of courage walking in, because what's happened, he's being sent to the Sede Taman prison, which is where they send all of the Gaza arrestees, detainees. And the last doctor, well, not the last doctor sent there, but in July, some of you all may recall that there was a big controversy when the IDF went to go arrest reservists at this prison because they had sodomized another doctor being held there to death.
Yeah. And there was an uproar in Israel over the arrest of these soldiers who did that.
Correct. Yes.
That was what the protests were. They weren't protesting the fact that the soldiers were raping detainees.
To death.
They were, to death. And of course, what all the Zionists say is, oh, they're all terrorists. I mean, all you have to do is they just say they're terrorists, and then everybody is supposed to not care what happens to them. First of all, that's why we have due process in civilized countries. Israel wants to call itself the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, then it has to abide by kind of like basic standards, which involve, before you visit extreme punishment on people, like keeping them in prison, they get to defend themselves, have trials and that kind of thing. And you certainly don't rape them to death.
Correct. But they classify anyone who even posts, anti-Israel, anyone who posts anti-Israel messages on social media as a terrorist. I mean, the word is meaningless. They have rendered it meaningless, just the same as every other, nonsense word like anti-Semitism or racism or all of the things. They don't mean anything because it's just constantly fluid, and it's just weaponized to shut people up, right?
Exactly. And it's the same with Hamas. I mean, to the extent, some people, I think they say are Hamas aren't even, but Hamas also is like a governmental entity. And so they, you can be like a garbage collector and work for Hamas. That doesn't mean that you're a terrorist. They just use that word,
it is, a lot like Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is also a political faction, and it has affiliates. They had doctors and whatnot that were affiliated with Hezbollah, working in Hezbollah controlled regions, who were not part of the militant wing, not part of the military at all, but it doesn't matter. It's an easy way for them to just classify every single person in the region as a terrorist, right? And unfortunately, it works rather well.
Yes, for a lot of people. And so the doctor is being abducted is sparking an uproar on Twitter. I hope that there's some diplomatic pressure coming from Western countries, although I don't expect anything anymore.
Right.
And also one thing worthy of note is I was reading about the people freezing to death in tents, especially babies. One reason is that the tents are in really bad shape because they used them last winter. So now they've had to survive 2 winters, and a lot of them are tattered and babies not only have trouble with the cold, but they have difficulty regulating their own temperatures. So any parent knows, like, they're new to the world, they can't really digest things, they can't do a lot of things, and that includes regulating temperatures. So they require a lot of care in that respect. And if you're living in a tattered tent in the middle of Gaza and
it's 46 degrees outside and it rains, your child is going to have a hard time. I mean, it's not just babies, it's toddlers. It's all the way up, probably I would say until you reach puberty, that you're going to struggle. Obviously no one as much as babies will, But yeah, it's just cruelty for the sake of cruelty. They have no plan. There were rumors about Netanyahu being diagnosed with prostate cancer. I don't know if you saw
Yeah,
that. He had
I
to
did.
undergo emergency
Yeah.
surgery. So that actually even makes everything so much worse, because who's steering the ship now,
Yeah.
right?
Well, he's saying they're saying that's not true, and it's just
Okay.
a benign situation, and he's having his prostate removed. I don't
I hope
even.
it's not true at all. I want to see
I
him stand trial for war crimes. So I genuinely
well,
hope he's in great health, to be quite honest with
you're
you.
optimistic. I don't think that he ever will stand trial for war crimes. I mean,
Well,
look, it's not a small thing. He can't go to Poland. I don't think we ever talked about that. He wanted to go to Poland for
right.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
memorial Holocaust ceremony, and he can't because Poland said they would arrest him. And that's pretty symbolic, I think, in many ways. So.
It's kind of interesting because, the Russians liberated Auschwitz in January of, I guess it was 45. So it'll be 80 years next month. And they're going to, of course, have a big ceremony and whatnot. And of course, Putin can't go because of the obvious. And now, Netanyahu will not be able to go because they said that they will, because Poland is a signatory to the Rome Statute. So they said they will enforce the law and they will arrest him. And so that is, God bless
Yeah.
Poland for that, for sticking to their guns on that.
Yeah, because not all countries are. So, I mean, first that you have the United States, who's like, basically saying they're going to punish countries who are going to enforce the warrant, which is just absolutely atrocious. And then you have France, initially said they were going to enforce it and then clearly caved to pressure because then they said they wouldn't. Kudos to the countries that are strong enough.
To be quite honest with you, I do not see him ever traveling to France, even though they said they wouldn't enforce it. I just don't think that the French people would tolerate it. I think very soon their options as far as traveling goes are going to be strictly limited to essentially the U.S. Even Canada said, Trudeau said that they would enforce it if the Canadians elect Pierre, whatever, LaPierre or whatnot. It might change, but I doubt it. I think his options are going to be limited to the U.S. and that's about it.
Yeah, well,
as they should be.
Yeah, exactly. At least he can't go on many vacations, so there's that. Of course, he deserves far worse than that. Well, I don't want to say what I think he deserves exactly. It's not very nice of me.
Yeah, I think probably most people listening to this will agree, or at least understand nonetheless. But we respect the rule of law around here. We respect international law. And so definitely want to keep an eye on that. Advocating. I don't know if you saw Anthony Blinken came out yesterday, or the State Department, came out, and Blinken was giving a speech somewhere, I don't even know where, talking about the rules of international law and protections for human rights.
Yeah.
And it was just so rich coming from him that to the point where I was like, you're shameless. You have no shame whatsoever. You people have enabled the worst humanitarian crisis in the last 80 years, essentially. And you still think you get to lecture others about human rights.
Yeah.
I will never forgive you for ceding America's every last shred of our moral high ground, to ever lecture anyone again.
Yes. I mean, it's sociopathic. And the more I think about it, I realize that you really can't be successful in this country, and maybe not in this world, whether in terms of power or money or both, unless you really don't have any morals. And what that means is that the people with a lot of power are the ones who are really sociopathic. And that just creates a really bad situation where we have what you've seen today. And at the end of the year, I think like a lot of people get very reflective. And I've been thinking a lot about the past year. And I mean, I don't think I'll ever see humanity the same again. I did. If you told me a year and a half ago that America would enable what is clearly a genocide, cover for it, that so many people who I liked and respected would be justifying this and saying that the most ridiculous excuse is that it's Hamas's fault these children are freezing to death or they're not free. I would never have believed you. I did think that there was a red line, and I thought that people had learned something from history, something. It turns out nothing.
Yeah. I mean, for me, most of that was shattered during COVID. I could not
Yeah.
believe the lengths that people would go to. Their selective, what they would believe from government, what they wouldn't believe from government,
Yeah.
the excuses that they would make, the way that they would go out of their way to punish their fellow human the second that they had just a little tiny bit of power over them. We saw just kind of like the worst of people come out. And but again, yeah, we kind of built this dissonant coalition, right? That
Yeah.
no, we're not like that.
Yeah.
We're not going to blindly trust the government. We're not going to blindly trust the narrative that they're pushing on us. And unfortunately, you saw just kind
The-
of that small tiny percentage of people, maybe 2 or 3% of people who really stuck to our guns, like day oneers is what
yeah.
I always call us.
Yeah.
Of them, about 85% fell right lockstep right into
Right.
into believing everything that a foreign government says, not
Right,
even
right.
our own.
Yeah. I it's so I would say COVID was like a huge turning point for me because for the reasons you said. I saw sort of, I think a lot of people react out of fear, and as someone who was more on the liberal side and certainly surrounded by friends and family on the liberal side, the people who I thought were rational sort of succumbed to fear and propaganda, what was obvious to me. And so that was a shock. And then I thought I found this group of people who were
Yeah,
rational and saw through propaganda and had, were humane, would put like children, before.
right.
And so it was sort of a double whammy. And then I thought it was these very people who I had trusted during the COVID era who I saw become the most vicious, the most inhumane,
Right.
the most irrational, the most fear driven. It was that, plus it just struck me as worse than what I saw during COVID. I mean, during COVID, I
Right.
didn't see people wishing death on children or excusing death for children
Right.
on the grounds of ethnicity or something like that. So it was sort of like this has brought me further to the edge of really having no further in terms of falling off the cliff of just
Mhm.
having no faith in humanity.
Well, it wasn't even that. It was like, we were still advocating for their children, even children like the children of the
Yes.
libs who were like COVID insane. We were
Yeah.
like, no, this is wrong that their
Yeah.
parents are doing this.
Yeah.
Those children should not suffer because their parents
Yes.
are
Yes.
delusional. Okay.
Yes.
We need to stand up for them. We have to reopen the schools. We have to ensure that these children, because again, we saw their parents as crazy and we saw their
Yeah.
children as victims of their parents. And now again, that just all went out the window, and people see these children as just as culpable in
What do
some
you
instances.
what do you think explains the difference? Like to me, I think a lot of it is just bigotry. It's anti-Arab bigotry. I think these people
Yeah.
cannot see Arabs as humans, and that includes children. Um, and I think that's fundamentally what's at the root of it. What's your take?
I think it's anti-Muslim.
Yeah.
I think it's more. I don't think people consciously think Arab. I think they
Yeah.
absolutely think Muslim, and there's just a strong anti-Muslim sentiment in this country. It's kind of bizarre because there actually are a lot of Muslims in the country. As far
Yeah.
as Jews go, I mean, there's I think almost as many Muslims as there are Jews, and
Oh,
yet
really? Yeah.
so few people have any interactions with Muslims that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. They just don't have the. When I say lobby, I'm just saying like they don't have the same familiarity with. Americans don't have the same familiarity with them, and it's just like this foreign culture that they're all scared of.
Yeah.
And you got to think like we were subjected after 9/11 to about a decade worth
Of
of this really
propaganda. Yeah.
weird propaganda, and then they kind of try to pull it back some, and then you do have a lot of cultural clashes,
Yeah.
especially in the West in general. Like over in Britain they have issues, and and it's not to say that Muslims are perfect by any means. Obviously
No.
there's a lot of, there are extremists, and they do some really crazy, really crappy things. Obviously, like the France attacks and whatnot, I think
Yeah.
about like that's like a big one. And so it's not like it's totally unfounded by any means, but it gets what we see, and we saw this with the market or with the Christmas market
Yes.
attack. Is that when something like that happens, it gets blown up, right?
Yeah.
It's this huge event, as opposed to like a white kid going into a Walmart, and gunning. I mean, it's kind of a big deal, but it doesn't get carried over into like
No,
larger cultural implications the way
exactly.
that when a Muslim does it. And so,
I mean, that there had been a school shooting by a white kid a few
right,
days
like
earlier.
three,
I don't know
yeah,
if you remember,
yeah,
and that doesn't
uh
like
huh,
spark these conversations. But and like I'm not a Muslim. My father was raised Muslim, but he's not practicing at all. I'm not like I'm not a huge fan of,
right,
certainly not some of the more extreme cultural practices, but I think this idea that Muslims are uniquely violent is really a problem. It's not, I don't think it's true. I think a
right.
lot of
I
it
agree.
ultimately stems from resentment at Western intervention. If you're
Right,
if you live in, you know, many Arab countries, your familiarity with the West is mostly like driven
being
by the fact
bombed.
that their bombs are being dropped on you.
Right,
Like you're not going to like the country that's doing that to you.
right,
And of course,
yeah.
that gets wrapped up. Like if you have a certain ideology, when you talk about these issues, it'll get wrapped up in the way you talk about it. So a lot of it can
Hmm.
sound like it's religious, but I think it also ultimately stems from um, our history of intervention in the region.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have bad actors that are going to cloak their bad deeds in religious, rhetoric
Right.
in order to excuse themselves, and we see it across the board. And right now, I actually don't know if it's more prevalent in the Muslim religion or not, because it's hard to differentiate, right,
Yeah.
between because, like I said, those instances always get blown up, and so it kind
Yeah.
of throws your frame of reference. But regardless, like I said the other day, I try not to draw grand conclusions from lone wolf acts. This isn't
Yeah.
the action of a state. Now, of course, if it was state sponsored, that's different, and that you can draw wider conclusions from that. And so, but again, these are, and perhaps that's taking us back to Gaza,
Yeah.
Hamas, and whatnot, is of course 17 years ago they held one election. Hamas got 40 something percent of the vote, so they've been in charge of Gaza ever since. I guess it's
Yeah.
18 years now,
Yeah.
but
And
uh,
50%, more than 50% of the people in Gaza weren't even born when that election was held. So the
correct,
idea that
right.
they, yeah. Um,
Right. And I get so upset because they say, well, they should have overthrown their government. And then we can get into the fact, well, okay, how do you overthrow a government when
yeah.
it is extremely well funded because the psychopaths next door want them in power because
Yeah.
it allows them to treat the entire population as a terrorist population, essentially. And so they ensure always, they never once, Israel never once demanded any kind of democratic restrictions on the flow of money. I've always wondered, like, well, why wouldn't you just demand that? Okay, in order to get this aid, you have to hold new elections. You have to
Yeah.
reaffirm your why not? Like, that just seems like such an easy solution. But of course, we know the answer to that is that they didn't want the
Yeah.
Palestinians to have any kind of unity or ability to represent as anything other than terrorists on the international stage.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's pretty clear that that's the situation, and they just recycle the same, propaganda, the same lines again, that they elected Hamas and they withdrew from
Right,
Gaza in 2005, so it's not under an occupation, but it's actually worse than an occupation because they've
right,
sealed off the borders. Gaza can't thrive economically, so it's a
right.
really desperate place. You can't travel. A lot of people can't get the treatment they need, medical treatment they need. Can't,
Right.
go to
You
school in
can't
another
take
place.
your
Yeah.
fishing boat out past 300 yards. You'll get blown
Yeah.
out of the water. It's the only place in the world where people can't even flee by sea, which
Yeah,
is,
and
I remember the first time I heard that, or in really thinking about it, it was so wild,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah. It's and then obviously, I'm not excusing terrorism. I'm always against violence against innocent people, but
Right.
when they protest, they get shot. When people in America try to boycott divestment and sanctions, you're anti-Semitic. They try to shut you down. In fact, in a lot of states, we can probably do a whole episode on this sometimes. Sometime you aren't allowed to boycott Israel. You literally
Right.
have to take a loyalty oath if you want to be employed by the state or contract
Mhm.
with the state, which is total First Amendment violation because the state can't condition, benefits based upon you are espousing a certain viewpoint.
Right.
So just they can't. we all agree terrorism is bad, violence is bad, but then
Right.
peaceful forms of protest are also uh, they make sure that
Prohibited,
doesn't
shut
prohibit it.
down. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So Palestinians are just supposed to take it year after year after year, and it's culminated in
Yeah.
this, I would say.
Well, you're so sweet because you're on the left, and you guys always
Well,
say that. But I come from the right, where we flag Gadsden flags and say the trees of liberty must be watered with the blood of tyrants from time to time. It is what it is. And so obviously, I think there's better ways to conduct yourself than what was done on 10/7. I still think that 10/7 was a total setup and that it was allowed to happen. And I do think that they kind of foolishly walked into that. Um, uh, I know that's going to tick a lot of people off, but I don't care. And so, uh, yeah, it is what it is. It happened. Regardless, we're a year out now, and it is zero justification for what is still continuing to go on. And more so, it is zero justification for the US to continue our unabetted, the limitless
yes,
support, you
yes.
know?
Well, we'll see if Trump changes things when he takes office in a few short weeks. And before we end, I did want to say just a brief word about Jimmy Carter, because he died yesterday at the age of
Yeah, yeah.
100. And I think Mel and I were chatting about this. We agree we're too young, believe it or not, to
Yep.
have been around during his presidency.
Yep.
So, I don't think I'm I know lots of people who have strong opinions both ways about his record, but as a post-president, I've admired him a lot. I read his book Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, probably 15 years ago or so.
Okay.
He was a great, and he didn't do what most former presidents do, which is try to make a lot of money.
Hmm.
Instead, he actually really tried to do some good in the world, and he cared a lot about the situation in Israel, Palestine, and one reason he was allowed to speak honestly about it was he wasn't dependent on corporate donors and that kind of thing, which is hard if you want to criticize Israel.
Right.
So lots of respect to him, and he will be missed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Really a great humanitarian. Definitely.
Yeah.
I was telling Janine that I'm probably one of the only people in America that doesn't have a real strong opinion on him either way. I think, some good, some bad, meh, I don't
Yeah.
think he was the terrible person that he was made out to be very often by Republicans.
Yeah.
But I do think that there, are definitely legitimate gripes there as well. But regardless, let's move on